In the mechanism of photosynthesis, it takes place in a disc-like structure we call the chloroplast. The chloroplast contains a membrane. It has an external membrane, the external membrane or outer membrane. It has an inner membrane called Thylakoid membrane. Then it has a fluid here. Also has a lumen. The fluid is the part that contains enzymes responsible for the dark stage of the photosynthesis, as we are going to see, or we call the light independent state. Here has a stroma, but the thylakoid membrane called the grana is the first place where photosynthesis starts. It contains chlorophyll. So photosynthesis starts at grana and ends at the stroma. So there are two stages of the mechanism of photosynthesis. There are two stages of photosynthesis. The first stage of photosynthesis is called light dependent state. Light dependent state. Some call it light reaction. Light reaction state is an old name. That the old name is light reaction state. Today we prefer to call it light dependent state, as we are going to see why. While the second stage of the photosynthesis is the light independent state. The light independent state still prefer to call it dark reaction state. However, it's better called light dependent state and light independent state. The light dependent state takes place at the membrane, the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast, that contains a chlorophyll pigment as we are going to see, is a part of the photosynthetic process that takes place, is a state that takes place only in the presence of light. Without light, this process will not occur. That's why it's referred as light dependent. Without light, it will not take place. We say that photosynthesis uses energy from the sunlight. This energy from the sunlight is absorbed in the light dependent independent state. Is absorbed in the light dependent state. So it's a state that takes place only in the presence of light. Without light, it will not take place. The absorption of this energy from the sunlight takes place at the first stage of photosynthesis, which we call the light dependent state. It depends on light to take place. There are four processes that takes place in the light dependent state. There are four processes that takes place in the light dependent state. What are the four processes that takes place? Number one is absorption of energy from the sunlight by the photosystem. The number two stage is the splitting of water molecule. The number three stage is conversion of NAD, NADP to NADPH. Number four, formation or synthesis of ATP. These are the four processes that takes place in the light reaction stage. So we have to look at each of these processes. First is the absorption of energy from the sunlight. The chlorophyll pigment is the photosystem, is the pigment that absorbs energy from the sunlight. When the energy from the sunlight hits the chlorophyll become energized. the chlorophyll becomes energized. Remember that we have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. The difference between these is they have a different absorption spectrum. We also have other accessory pigments that can absorb sunlight also. That is example is carotenoid is also an accessory pigment. It helps to absorb sunlight from absorbs energy from the sunlight. However, the energy they absorb is being transferred to the main absorption the main pigment that will be energized. So when the chlorophyll absorbs energy from the sunlight, they become highly energized. They become highly energized. The chlorophyll becomes energized chlorophyll. Energized chlorophyll. Now, the energy from the chlorophyll. So this energized chlorophyll has a lot of energy which will be used in the second stage, which is photolysis of water. So the water molecule in the leaves, remember that this is taking place in the leaves of the plant, and during transport, the plant absorbs water from the soil, and is being distributed to the plant by the process of transpiration. So the leaves contains water, enough water, which is going to be split by the energy of the chlorophyll. The energy of the chlorophyll will be used to split the water molecule, to form hydrogen ion and the hydroxyl ion, The hydroxyl ion, which is a negative ion, still combines with another hydroxyl ion to form back water, and oxygen is given out. This is how this is removed. Why the hydrogen ion produced by the splitting of the water molecule is what is needed in the photosynthetic process. The reason of splitting water molecule is to get hydrogen ion, not actually to get oxygen. So the hydrogen ion, so the byproduct, remember, of oxygen during photosynthesis, oxygen is given out. That oxygen comes from the water molecule. You can see that now. So, but the oxygen is not our interest. Our interest is hydrogen ion that is formed. The hydrogen ion will be taken in the third process by coenzyme NADP. It will undergo some enzymatic reaction to convert this NADP by addition of hydrogen ion to NADPH, which is reduced form of these coenzymes, reduced coenzyme. So the hydrogen ion will be taking the NADP will take the hydrogen ion and become reduced as NADPH. This NADPH is going to be used in the next stage of the reaction, which is light independent state or the dark reaction. So what is our interest in light dependent state? Our interest is to produce NADPH. We're going to see what NADPH is used for. And the number two, the remaining energy will be used in the fourth process, which is the formation of ATP. ADP will react with another phosphate. The energy that enable this reaction is the remaining energy from the chlorophyll will be used to convert ADP to ATP. I believe you know that ADP means adenosine diphosphate, while ATP means adenosine triphosphate. So now you can see that in the light dependent state, which is the light reaction state, two things are produced. NADPH and the ATP are the two things that is produced, which will be needed in the last stage of the photosynthesis. The oxygen is also produced, but oxygen is given out. Is given out. Remember, the oxygen is produced from the splitting of water molecule. So after the light dependent stage, we get NADPH and ATP. Then we move over to the next stage of reaction, which is light independent state. Light independent state. Light independent state is called light independent because it does not require light to take place. It can still take place in the presence of light, but in the absence of light, it occurs. That's why it is also referred as dark reaction state. But why we don't prefer to use the dark reaction state is not only in the dark it takes place. It can also take place in the daytime. So that's why we prefer to use the word light independent state. It can take place in the day, it can take place at night. It does not require light to take place. However, in the presence of light, it still takes place. So we call it light independent state. This is the stage that does not require light, that does not require light. This is the state that does not require light to occur. It can take place in the presence of light or in the absence of light. It takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast, while the other one takes place at the chylod membrane called grana. So stroma contains lots of enzymes that catalyzes CO2 in the presence of NADPH and ATP to produce the first stable product of photosynthesis called glucose. So what happens during this process is CO2, which how does the plant get the CO2? Plant get the CO2 during respiration in plants. Remember that from the stroma, during the stomatal transpiration, the plants receive CO2 during respiration and remove oxygen, which are produced during the photosynthesis. So CO2 is taken in by the plant. I hope you know that. So the CO2 that is taken in through the stomata of the plants are used to produce by the activities of enzymes and by the presence of NADPH and ATP, which are produced in the first stage of photosynthesis, which we call the light dependent state, are used now. NADPH plus ATP, product of light dependent state, with the enzyme. This enzyme complex is called Rubisco, which is beyond the scope of our study now to discuss the series of reactions that takes place here. Is a cascade of reactions. Rubisco is ribose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase. There are a lot of series of cascade reactions that takes place here that leads to the production of the first product of photosynthesis, GP, which we call the glycerate phosphate. This is a three carbon compound, a three carbon sugar is produced. So the whole process that takes place here is as a result of activities of enzymes. This glycerate phosphate, which is the first product, will be quickly used to produce glucose, which is a six carbon sugar. Plants where the first product that is produced is glycerate phosphate is called C3 plants. There are some few plants that has high process of photosynthesis, Such plants, in the presence of NADPH and ATP, in the presence of Rubisco, the cascade of reaction leads to production of oxalic acetate, which we use to produce the glucose molecule. This is a 4 carbon sugar. The plant that the first product is oxalic acetate is called C4 plant. They have high photosynthetic process than C3 plants. Example of this kind of plant is sorghum, sugarcane. They are C4 plants. The other differences between C4 plants and C3 plants, which I would like you to find out more differences between C4 plants and C3 plants. So this whole process that takes place in the stroma does not require light. It is a process that leads to the production of food, the glucose, which is the first stable product of photosynthesis. The glucose produced will be converted to sucrose and transported to the part of the plant where it's going to be stored as starch. And that part of the plant is what serves as food to man. Is what serves as food to man. If it's stored at the tuber is the part of the plant we harvest and eat. If it's stored as stem, the stem becomes the edible part of the plant for animal. If it's stored at the leaves becomes the edible part of the plant. So the sucrose produced are being transported by the process of translocation, which we are going to see when we talk about transport in plants, and are stored in any part of the plant, depending on the kind of the plant. So, but glucose is produced in the leaf, but can be stored in any other part of the plant, can be stored even at the root, can be stored at the stems, or any other part of the plant. So the process by which plant uses CO2 to produce glucose is the dark reaction state, which is better called light independent state. It makes use of a lot of enzymes. It's an enzymatic reaction that takes place, a cascade of reactions that takes place at the stroma of the chloroplast. So this is the process that leads to the equation I wrote earlier, the equation of photosynthesis, which is CO2, which is absorbed, which is taken by the plant through the stomata. Plant takes in CO2, reacts with, in the presence of water, to produce the glucose, and the oxygen is given out plus energy from water to oxygen is occur at light dependent state or light reaction. Water is splitted to produce this. Some of the enzymes NADPH and ATP are produced at this state. Chlorophyll is also needed for the reaction to begin in the presence of sunlight. Why the CO2 is used to form the glucose at the process of light independent state. Light independent state. Question is balanced. So this is the photosynthetic process. This to this is light independent state. Water to oxygen is light dependent state. These are formed at the light dependent state and are used at light independent state to produce this. Does that make sense to you? Thank you and God bless you.